2025 was one of the best fig seasons yet. It was an excellent year where I got to try so many different varieties. Of the 150 varieties I got to taste this year, I liked the vast majority of them. Most of them were somewhere between good and great. I wanted to make a video that was a top 10 or a top 20, but I wasn't able to cut it down to anything like that. I cut it down to a little over 30. So I'm going to end up splitting it into two parts. I'm going to do a part 1 now and then a part 2 with, about 15 to 20 in each video, just so I could cover a couple of the ones I wanted to talk about. The first fig I want to talk about is White Madeira number 1. White Madeira number 1 is always on my list. It's always one of my favorite figs. Most years it is my favorite fig. This year was no exception. It was just an awesome fig. It has an excellent taste, great berry flavor. It's a decent sized fig. It's a part of the Adriatic family. So being an Adriatic, that means it's green on the outside, usually lightish green on the outside, with a deep, deep red color on the inside. The Adriatic figs, all of them are excellent. I would recommend just about every Adriatic fig to you. White Madeira number 1 is always one of my favorites of them. I feel like it has a little extra something in the flavor. It has something to the berry flavor that reminds me of like a good wine. I don't know how else to describe it. It has like a little bit more of a complex flavor than some of the more simple, sugary, sweet berry flavored Adriatics. They're all a little different. They all have different properties. Some of them are bigger. Some of them have a denser pulp. Some of them have a different texture to them. They ripen differently. Some of them shrivel up really well. But White Madeira number 1 definitely, as far as flavor goes, is always one of my favorite. I like it so much that I put one in ground that I've had going for 3 years now. And then right next to it is another one I wanted to mention, Prosciutto Unknown. And Prosciutto Unknown has a lot of the same qualities as White Madeira number 1. They are different, as a lot of the Adriatics have little differences to them. They're not just repetitions of the same fig. But Prosciutto number 1 has an interesting property that I notice every year that, like a lot of the Adriatics, but especially Prosciutto number 1, or no, Prosciutto Unknown, as it gets colder and it's still ripening figs, the figs off that are still really good all the way through parts of December, whereas a lot of the other trees, I know the Mount Etna types and the Chicago Hardy types, they start to just completely lose their flavor once it gets really cold out. But the Adriatics, especially Prosciutto Unknown, still maintain their flavor and they still maintain a lot of taste. And it helps you kind of extend the season. I have White Madeira number 1 and Prosciutto Unknown in ground next to each other, and those are some of the only trees I'm getting figs off of in December. So I would definitely recommend those two to anybody. The next fig on my list here is Borda Barraquer, and Borda Barraquer is one of the prettiest figs I grow. And when I mean pretty, I mean the interior of the fig. When I cut them in half, the inside of them is always phenomenal. They're consistently really, really good. They have a different coloration to them where they almost look speckled because they're really dark on the inside, but the whole thing is not dark. There's little bits of lighter colors poking through, and there's always a deep pool of honey in them that the outside white area gets a tint of purple to it. So it's just a gorgeous fig, and they always are kind of round. They're very circular. They I would call them a medium-sized fig. They're not huge, but they're definitely not small either, and they can be relatively big. But it's definitely one of my favorite varieties. It's one of the best to look at for sure. Also great tasting, and the tree itself has a really nice growth habit to it. It's a pretty grower is how I would describe it. It just grows vigorously. It looks nice. It does well in different environments, and I always end up ripening all the figs on them, so it's not too late or anything like that. Definitely one I would recommend. The next fig I have on the list is Verdolino, and I have this one on here for a couple of reasons. It has sort of the look of an Adriatic fig, where it's dark red on the inside and it's light green on the outside, although this one's a little bit smaller and it's a little bit elongated. But the real reason I have it on the list is because, first of all, it is an early fig, and basically any good fig that you can get early on in the season gets a lot of bonus points, because early season figs are tough to find, first of all. They're great for growing just about anywhere because you get main crop figs even in seasons that are short, so in northern climates. But with Verdolino, the other reason is that it has an interesting property. Some fig varieties like to ripen all of their figs at once. Like I would describe Celeste as kind of like that. It ripens them in large crops where you'll get a bunch at one time, and then sometimes there'll be a long break and then you'll get another batch of them, or you'll get a bunch here and there. But Verdolino has this really cool property where it puts up long branches, and on those long branches, there's just a fig at every node alternating sides, and they just seem to ripen every couple days. One new fig will ripen. So with Verdolino, I was eating them from the very beginning of the season till the end of the season, and I never got like 20 or 30 at a time, but felt like I was eating them the entire season. And that's a really cool feature to have. It's not great if you're a commercial grower and you're trying to package all your figs and send them off somewhere at one time. So it wouldn't make a great commercial fig, but it's an excellent fig to have in your yard so that you can just have one at a time here and there. And that's a great property I like about it. It's also an excellent fig. It does really well with rain resistance too. Some of the small figs tend to do better than the large figs with rain resistance, which matters more in some of the East Coast climates like we have here in Maryland. De la Roca is another one of my favorite figs. It has been on my list of my top figs for the last couple years. It has a flavor that I find myself always looking forward to. It has a bit of an acidity. I don't know how to describe it. Kind of an acidic bite to it. There's not a lot of figs that have it, but the ones that do end up being my favorite. I would almost describe it sometimes as like a little bit of a fruit punch flavor or a little bit of a citrus flavor to it. And any of the figs with that acidity end up on my list as some of my favorites. Another one I can think of that is always on my list too is De Tres Esplates. But I'll mention that one on the next video. So De La Roca is a medium-sized fig. I believe it's another Pons fig. And it gets this coloration to it where sometimes it can be a little bit lighter in color, and then it has darker parts to it, like a darker purpley brown color. Sometimes it's a little bit splotchy. It does pretty well. It does pretty well with moisture, which we get a lot of here. So it can split occasionally, but for the most part, De La Roca, along with the other figs with that bit of acidity to them, hold up really well in the rain, and they don't spoil even when they do split a little bit. Yeah, De La Roca is just one that the flavor of it itself, it's one of the figs I look forward to eating the most. It is one of the best tasting of any of the figs that I grow. 5 Terre A is a fig that was completely new to me this year. I just started the cutting in February or something like that of last year. And I didn't expect to get figs off of it, but I did. And I just thought they were really interesting. I don't know how this one will turn out. I've only had probably half a dozen figs off of it, but the ones I had were surprisingly good. They had a little bit of a squat shape to them. They were deep red on the inside, like a reddish ostiole, and I just remember really liking the flavor. We'll see how this one pans out. This one is completely new to me, so I don't have a lot of data on it, and I haven't had a ton of them, but I look forward to this one in the future. It is an Italian variety named after, just a play on the name Cinque Terre, which is the part of Italy it's supposedly from. And yeah, go out and try this one too. I had very little to no information on it before I tried it, so it was one that definitely surprised me this year. Martorano was my biggest surprise fig of the year. It was my first year trying it. I've had the tree for 2 years now, but it was the first figs I got off of it, and I got a lot of figs off of it. For a first year to fruit tree, I got dozens and dozens of figs off of it, and they were all excellent. It handled the rain well. It had really good flavor. If anything, the flavor reminded me a little bit of De La Roca. Definitely different in a lot of ways. I think it handled rain really well and just had a little bit of acidity too that I really like, and just a excellent flavor. One of my favorite tasting figs. I hadn't heard much about it before. I had no sort of idea going into it, which is what's fun about buying fig varieties that aren't frequently talked about. Sometimes you know what to expect when you're getting a certain fig, and sometimes it just surprises you. The next 2 figs I wanted to talk about are part of a grouping of figs, and that grouping of figs is called the Mount Etna figs. The Mount Etna figs are one of the types of figs that I recommend to people the most, especially locally here in Zone 7, in warmer zones, Zone 8. They are very productive figs. They are excellent tasting figs. There are quite a few varieties that are Mount Etnas. I know I grow at least a dozen different Mount Etna varieties. They are also, one of the big features is that they are usually very cold hardy. I have some Mount Etna trees that I've left out in 4-degree temperatures, so 4 degrees Fahrenheit with no protection, and had little to no damage on them. And there's plenty other varieties where that's not the case. So Mount Etnas are one of my most recommended types of figs, especially to new growers. If you don't have any figs, that's what I would recommend you starting with, as a Mount Etna fig. Now, there are a lot of different Mount Etna types, and I grow a lot of different Mount Etna types, and they are all good, but some years certain ones stick out more to me, and some consistently stick out as some of my favorite Mount Etna varieties. So I just wanted to talk about 4 different varieties in that grouping right now, and the 4 varieties are Kesariani, which is a Greek Mount Etna fig; Crozes, which is, I don't know the heritage of that one, but it was an excellent fig for me this year; Malta Black, which is one of my older in-ground trees that always does really well and is very productive and is one of the better tasting of the Mount Etnas; and Michael Grace Mystery Unknown, which is a fig I got from my friend Dan. So first I'll talk about Kesariani, because Kesariani is one that is on my list of my favorite Mount Etna figs basically every year. It produces a bunch of excellent figs, so it's always highly productive for me. The figs do really well drying on the tree. With all the Mount Etna varieties, though, I would recommend experimenting with letting them get extremely ripe, just to the point before they spoil. Because a lot of people will pick them once they start to darken and then be like, these are just okay. But if you really let them get very ripe and sort of experiment with how ripe you can let them get, sometimes an organza bag can really make a difference in just protecting some of them as they get extremely ripe, so that the wasps and stuff don't get to them. But Kesariani is one that I like to get really ripe, and they're always excellent figs, and it's been good for me every year since I've had it. I think I've had this variety about 4 years, I believe. Crozes is another variety in the Mount Etna family that I'd like to talk about. This one was new to me this year. I think I got it a year ago, so it's maybe about a 1 or 2 year old tree, but this year was the first year, 2025 was the first year ripening figs off of it. And they were probably my favorite of the Mount Etna figs this year. We'll see if that holds up for next year. We'll see if that was just where the tree was placed in better light. But they consistently ripened figs out to the edge more than some of the other varieties, and they were just some of the best tasting of all of the Mount Etnas that I had this year. Another oddity about them that I saw was that they also took a little longer to ripen once they started ripening. They had a longer ripening period where they darkened up, and then you really had to wait and wait and wait. So, a couple extra days compared to some of my other Mount Etnas. So I'm curious to see if that holds true this year too. The next one on there, Malta Black, has probably been my overall favorite Mount Etna that I have planted here. Now, that could partly be because it's got a decent spot in ground and it's been growing in ground for 4 years. Most plants, if you let them grow in ground for 4 years, will produce better figs than just about anything else you can get. That 3-4 year mark seems to be where figs really start to get their final taste, the taste that they're going to have throughout the life of the plant. So some people will, make decisions on plants at like 1 or 2 years, and I don't find that to be very useful. But Malta Black has consistently been one of my top Mount Etna varieties, and I have one right outside my back door here, and it's a great tree. It produces a ton of figs this year, over 100 figs this year, and they are excellent. And they seem a little bigger. That could also be because it's an older in-ground tree. Michael Grace Mystery to me is a little more, I'm unsure about this one, but the figs that I did get off it were so good that I'm very interested in seeing what this sort of has to hold, and how different it will be from some of the other Mount Etna varieties. Uh, I think the ones that I had were a little bit bigger and they ripened really well. I don't know if that's a microclimate thing or just where they were in my orchard, but I only got a few figs off this, as this was a new tree to me from Dan, but the ones that I did get were really good. So I'm really looking forward to this one next year too. Black Celeste is the next one I'm going to talk about, and Black Celeste makes my list automatically just because it's such a pretty fig. It's the most interesting looking fig I think I grow. It is extremely similar to the regular Celeste I have. I think I even have a picture here to show of the two of them side by side. Size, shape, mostly taste. The Black Celeste has a bit more of a berry flavor to it than the regular Celeste. But what really is interesting about this one is the color it puts off. It ripens, if you let it really ripen, to somewhere between dark purple and black on the inside, or dark purple with darker purple sections. It's just a beautiful fig on the inside when you cut it open. It looks almost not real. I had multiple people accuse me of um, adjusting the photos, but there were just so many different Black Celeste figs I ate this year, and they all had, if you let them ripen well, just an amazing looking dark purple to black color on the interior. Just one of the most interesting fig varieties I grow in terms, especially in terms of color. And now, in terms of taste, it does taste quite a bit like regular Celeste to me, but does have a little bit more of a berry flavor. I'm not sure how it performs in ground with cold hardiness. The regular Celeste is possibly the most cold hardy tree I grow. So it would be great if Black Celeste was the same. But I did plant one in the orchard this year, so we'll see. It's just a very interesting variety, one I really would get excited to cut open because of, the different patterns and the different color variations on the inside. Excellent fig, and one I'm definitely glad to be growing. Angelito is another variety that I just really love the taste of, love the properties of. The Angelito tree I think I have two or three of them now. One of them got knocked over in a storm early in the spring, and it was one of the fastest growing ones I have. So it had a lot of new growth on it. So when it got knocked over by one of those big 60-mile-an-hour windstorms we have, the top of it broke off, and it annoyed me, but I cut it up into pieces, the little bit of top growth that came off, and I rooted them. I got another tree out of that. But where it broke off, it put off 6 new branches from that spot, and it still had time to ripen a ton of figs off of them. It pushed out a bunch of figs this year, and of all of my Adriatic fig types, this was the one that put out the largest figs this year. And since the Adriatic figs are some of my favorite types of figs, them being bigger and excellent tasting and productive, that definitely a winner of a tree for me. And I'm looking forward to getting many more off this one next year. I did put one in ground also of Angelito to see how that does, to see how it handles the winter, and to see if it's able to ripen figs in time, being in the ground here in Zone 7B. Even if it doesn't, it's excellent in a pot, and it's just an excellent fig variety and one I always look forward to. Atreano is the next fig on my list here, and this is one I wanted to add for a few reasons. Mainly because of how productive it is for the size of tree I have. Probably the most productive tree I have that's not that big. This year was my first year getting fruit off of Atreano, and it didn't get to, barely got to shoulder height on me. It wasn't a very big tree, but it was covered in figs, and it was covered in figs early. These ones ripened and started ripening very early. I don't know if it will always be this early of a fig, but it was for me in 2025. And the figs were huge. They were all in the 60 to 90 gram range, which for me is just huge. And to have that many on that small of a tree, it took up almost no space, and I just got pounds and pounds and pounds of figs off of it. They really needed to be let to ripen really, really well. They didn't have a lot of taste if you harvested them early, but if you let them get to where it looked like the neck of the fig was about ready to rip off and the fig was ready to tear apart and fall off the tree, that's when they had their best flavor. And they leaned a little more towards the reddish. The pulp on the inside of the Atreano figs has a little bit of a yellowishness to it and a bit of a pinkishness to it. And sometimes as they got really ripe, it would get closer to pink, a little more red than pink. They have a texture to them that's interesting too. The texture and taste has a little bit of a butteriness to it. So interesting figs, and just the volume of figs that you would get to eat and just very juicy figs for this tree was just a lot. So I will definitely be planting another one of these. I know I have one. I think I have one in ground and one in a pot, but definitely one I want to try more of for just for its productivity. Very interesting tree. The next ones on here are 3 figs that are part of the same group, and that group is the Col de Dames. The Col de Dame figs are some of the best tasting figs out there. They are some of the most interesting, some of the most interesting looking. The interior of all of the Col de Dames for me basically ripen up to about the darkest you can get on the interior of a fig. The darkest red and deep red, sometimes almost purple, but more in the range of red. And they all have a lot of similarities to them. The Col de Dame name comes from the shape of the fig, where it has sort of a soft, rounded neck, almost looking like shoulders on the top of the fig. All of them are basically medium size for me. And most of the name differences of these 3 varieties come from what the exterior looks like as they ripen. So the 3 I have on my list here are Col de Dame Blanc, Col de Dame Grise, and Col de Dame Mutante. Col de Dame Blanc, the first one, is just one of the most interesting figs. It has that shape that I described. It has this really deep red pulp, which contrasts really well with the sort of yellowish color it ripens to. It can get a little bit dingy looking on the outside of it, and it has a really beautiful interior color. And then the ostiole, the hole at the bottom, has a bit of a redness to it. They're some of the best tasting figs out there. All of the Col de Dames have a very dense pulp, so the texture is a little bit different and a little bit denser than some of the other varieties, and just an awesome berry flavor. Just one of my favorite figs to eat. And all 3 of these can really sit on the tree and sort of dry up a bit and shrivel up a bit before you eat them, and they just get sweeter and sweeter. The next one on here, Col de Dame Grise. This year was one of the first times I've gotten figs off of my Col de Dame Grise, so it took a couple years to start producing for me. But it just produced a fig that reminded me a lot of my Col de Dame Blanc, but it has a really cool kind of powdery gray color to the outside of it, which I found really interesting. And a lot of the same shape. This one was actually pretty productive this year. Just an excellent fig. And Col de Dame Mutante is the prettiest of the 3 of them. It hasn't been as productive as my Col de Dame Blanc, but Col de Dame Mutante starts out ripening and it doesn't have stripes to it. And you think, oh no, this one reverted. But then a week or so later, it develops these really dramatic looking stripes and super obviously a striped fig. And then as it fully ripens, they sort of fade to a darker color to where they're not as obvious. But it's just a really interesting, really pretty fig. And the interior of this one gets extremely dark red. All 3 of them are in the top, would be in most people's top 10 of figs for fig taste. And they all 3 are also a little bit on the late side, so I wouldn't go putting one of these in ground if you're in zone 6 or anything like that. But I would, in most areas of the country, I would keep these in a pot. And they are excellent figs that I would recommend to anybody who can ripen them in time. We don't have that long of a grow season, and I seem to get all of them to ripen in time. Sometimes with a little bit of head start. Definitely great figs that I would recommend to anyone based on flavor. White Algiers is the last one I'll talk about in this video, and it is another one that has similarities to some of the Adriatic figs. This one has some different properties for me so far that we'll see if they hold up. It has a little bit different of a shape for me. It's a little more squat looking and a little bit thicker of an outside layer on the fig, but just excellent taste. It seems to hold up better than some of my others in wetter environments and rain and seem to split a little bit less. I don't know if that'll be consistent next year or if that was how I watered this one specifically, but definitely very promising and one I liked a lot. I had my white Algiers tree next to my Angelito tree, and I definitely was looking for some of those to ripen whenever I walked by. And sometimes that's what my favorites list comes down to, is ones that I remember walking through the orchard and being excited to get figs off of, or excited to eat figs off of, and looking forward to the next one off them. And white Algiers was definitely on that list this year. To keep this list under 40 minutes so that it's watchable, I am cutting it into 2 separate lists, like part 1, which is this video, and then I'll do a part 2 in another week or 2, because I just have too many varieties that I like. I can't even fit them on these 2 videos. I definitely left plenty of figs off this video that I could have included. Some of them it's just because I didn't get more than a handful of figs off the tree this year, so I just left it off for that reason, even if it's still one of my favorites. And sometimes that has a lot to do with pruning. I sell a lot of cuttings each year, so I heavily prune some of these trees, and excessively pruning a tree can sometimes affect how many fruit you get off it the next year. But just to keep this list reasonably long and not extremely long, I'm splitting it into 2, and this will be the end of this video. And so look out for my next one when it comes up on the rest of the fig varieties for this year that I selected. And there's at least 15 on the next video, I believe. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you for watching. Keep an eye out for part 2. I'll be releasing in about 2 weeks, and that will have a whole bunch of other great figs from 2025. Thanks.